Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started, and the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife and sharing some fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time.
My guest today is Nicola Foster, who is a relationship and intimacy therapist and coach. And Nicola created a rather phenomenal guide called Love in Lockdown. And it's all about helping people cope with their relationships, work out what might be going wrong, and just coping generally with their intimate relationship person under lockdown. And I thought this was such a valuable topic, and I just had to have you on the podcast. So Nicola, welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much. It's such a important topic at this time, and I just felt really moved to get something on paper. I do most of my work has been speaking with clients and meeting with clients, but I really felt moved to get something down because there was so much, at the end of March, the beginning of April, coming out for families in lockdown and homeschooling and with great stuff. But I felt moved. I thought, well, I know some things here about intimate relationships, and they may, as we know, be facing quite a lot of challenge. So I thought, well, perhaps there'll be a few tidbits that I can offer. So thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's great. I will have the link in the show notes for where you can go and get this guide, and I would really recommend that you go and get it. But we're going to talk about it in detail now because there's lots of juicy stuff in it, I have to say. And I'm looking forward to this as my own personal therapy session because, as I admitted before we hit record, I think even if you have the most wonderful relationship on the planet, which some days I do and some days I don't. Today is like, oh my goodness, I could just punch him on the nose, quite frankly. And I'm sure that a lot of people are feeling like that. But I also feel guilty for feeling like that because I know actually how fortunate I am to be in lockdown with my significant other.
Yes.
I'm not alone. I do have somebody that I could punch in the face if I wanted to. I won't, I promise. But it must be very difficult for people who don't have that issue. So in a way, I feel guilty for feeling that way. But what are some of the biggest issues that you're seeing, Nicola, at this time?
Well, like you say, irritability with a partner's like idiosyncrasies. That's definitely right up there. And because we've never, nobody has ever really been faced with so much time together, day in, day out, without the popping out and seeing a friend and getting a coffee and just, usually that's such a great antidote to when you get frustrated with someone. It's just, a change of scenery and then coming back and you see them afresh. We're not having that. That's definitely one of them. Another one, which is similar, which is sort of just maybe not taking enough time alone. Because before, if you were going out to the office or you were going out to visit family, I love another relationship therapist, Esther Perel. Some of your listeners may have listened to her on her podcast. She's got that great podcast. And she talks about desire happening, connection happening in the space between. And it's that mystery, that little bit of space that allows people to feel wanting for each other. And that bit of space has kind of got very, very small. So that's really an issue.
Yeah, her book title has become reality, hasn't it? Mating in Captivity.
That's it. Yeah,
it really
exactly.
is. That is it now, isn't it? Yeah. And how on earth do you keep any kind of excitement going when it's 24/7 with another person?
I think she said, I listened to her and at the beginning of one of her podcasts at the beginning of lockdown, and she said something similar. She said, I didn't realise when I wrote Mating in Captivity that people would literally be held captive. And her husband were, it was their wedding anniversary, and they had arranged to go to a restaurant in their living room, and they'd set up the linen and the candleware and really nice flowers, and arranged to meet each other for a date and have dinner, which I thought was a fab idea.
That is a great idea, isn't it? Yeah, if you can, it's about being creative, I think, isn't it? There's so many people are being creative about what they're doing, but yeah, within these small four walls, it's can be quite a challenge.
And we've already been smiling and laughing, and I think that's one of the keys, that is finding the bits where I know people have said to me they feel guilty having fun, because we're all aware of there's a lot of people are losing people. There's a lot of grief in the collective and personally. Many of us know people who are losing family members, and it can be hard in that situation to feel like it's okay to have a giggle. But I think, that can really help, to just do something silly and creative with your partner where you're serving other people. I know my partner and I made a silly video, and I felt a bit guilty because I thought, well, we should be more serious somehow, But actually, lots of my friends who, key workers in the NHS in really difficult circumstances were like, oh, please make another video. We really enjoyed seeing your fun. And, we need light and shade, don't we? It's important to be aware and thoughtful about other people's experience and not be insensitive. And at the same time, it's a bit of a cliche, but that whole, you've got to put the airline mask on first. If you're not having some time to rest, laugh, enjoy, the flowers in the garden, then you're not going to be available to be supportive to your partner when they're down or hurting.
Yeah, I noticed that you talked about how important it is to look after ourselves when we're talking about looking after our relationship. So can you perhaps expand on that?
Yeah, I put that, like in the guide, I started with this little pyramid, and I thought I did a base of self-care. It just struck me that how can we be connected with someone else and available to listen to someone else and expect them to listen to us if we're not listening to ourselves? And if we're overtired and overwrought because we've just kind of not given ourselves any self-care, then the chances of things getting a bit fraught are higher. And I realise as I say that it could sound a bit trite. It's hard. I mean, a lot of people I'm speaking to are not finding that they're quieter at this time. There's a lot of people who are busier at this time with responsibilities for caring for, trying to support other family members or friends, perhaps different sorts of work duties, or having to take on different jobs in supermarkets, or, different responsibilities. They're busy, and self-care it's hard to prioritize. It reminds me of that thing I remember hearing about meditation. They say that, if you haven't got time to meditate for half an hour, then you need to meditate for an hour. It's when you haven't got the time is when you really have to double down and attempt to make sure that you get some time for you.
And I think it was interesting what you were saying about the video and having fun. I've noticed that TikTok, do you know TikTok? The video
tried
platform.
It, but
I've been on there. I haven't made any videos, but I've noticed that seems to have gone really mainstream recently. And I think it's exactly that fun element that people are grabbing hold of. And you've got people doing really silly little videos at home, but it's incredibly popular because it lifts us, doesn't it? It does, enable us to have a little element of light relief, and that the barrage of news. So in relationships, I know that, for example, me and my other half, he'll be down one day and I'll be okay, and then I'll be down one day and he'll be okay, or it'll be per hour. Maybe we're going up and down by the hour. and trying to juggle that and trying to help him when he's down. And then, you know, sometimes I don't have the energy to do that, and I can see that he doesn't have the emotional bandwidth to help me either. So that can be quite taxing, can't it?
For sure. And I think one thing to respond on that is just giving somebody the space to be how they are without taking it personally, that, you know, it's to do with us or something that, you know, that we could be doing more to make it better, and just simply being there without needing to fix it. You know, I think that's so key for all relationships, whether that's intimate relationships or, you know, with parenting and with families. It's, if we can just let the other person know, you know, I can see that you're really struggling, and I'm here if you need me, without trying to kind of need to make it better or make it go away. You know, we are all going to be on this roller coaster of, you know, like you say, whether it's by the day, the hour, sometimes by the minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talk about, in your guide, you talk about a daily check-in. What's that?
So this is something that in couples therapy, sometimes I recommend it to clients, particularly if they don't tend to talk about things that are worrying them or difficult, or that they would like to change about the other person, or that they, you know, sometimes people squash down the difficult things for fear of upsetting the other person or causing the other person to have any feelings. And that can work for a certain amount of time, but it's a bit like a elastic band. You know, you're going to pull it and pull it and pull it and pull it, and then it's going to snap, because it's hard squashing down those feelings. So the idea of a daily check-in, or a daily temperature reading, as it's called in the guide, is to create, you know, either daily or every other day, a regular space to come together and share things like pieces of information that you want to communicate and haven't gotten around to, but particularly appreciations. I mean, that's where I start in every bit of couples therapy, is appreciations. It's so easy to notice the difficult parts, you know, the irritations, the frustrations, and we tend to get out of the habit of saying what we appreciate and what we are enjoying. So that's really important to, if that's been missing, to get that back in regularly. But the one that I think is really helpful is to make requests. It's so different, the quality of saying something like, you know, oh, it drives me crazy, you're always leaving your dishes in the sink. And, you know, when you left your dishes in the sink again, my request is that neither of us leave the dishes in the sink. You know, it's really frustrating. It's like making a request for change without having to kind of blame the other person or complain. Or when there's a lot of blaming going on, it can just spiral down. But a request, most people are really happy to listen to a request. And the beauty of a request is, if it isn't something that you can agree to, then you can say something. You know, maybe you can't agree. Maybe you like leaving your dishes in the sink, and you want to have a discussion about whether that would be okay. You know? And that's so different, of course, for different couples. For some couples are going to have really different views about what levels of cleanliness are okay.
We do, my other half and me, not so much on the cleanliness stakes, but on the clutter. I like clear spaces. This is the only place where I have any sort of knickknacks and things in my office, and this is my space. But I like things to be clear and things to be away, and having my other half at home 24/7 and working from home, and he's used to having his own office, you know, off-site, which is full of all his stuff. So now he's we're very lucky. We have another room that he's been able to take over. So he's actually not in the main living area. Thank goodness. So there is a door that I can close on him. But his stuff, it just breeds. It just grows and gets bigger and bigger. And I have to keep trying to stuff it back away into his room where I can close the door.
Yeah, it's something I'm hearing from quite a lot of people. It's one of the really tough situations in lockdown is this, people suddenly having to work together in the same house when before they had separate workplaces, and it's a lot.
Well, in a way, I'm lucky because I'm used to working from home, and I have this lovely little garden office, and this is my space. But I'm used to going into the house whenever I feel like and it being empty, and it's no longer empty. It's like he's in my workspace. What's going on? But you mentioned a wonderful book that I'm a huge fan of, which is the 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work by John Gottman. I wondered if you could pick out some things from that, because I really recommend anybody reading that book, but the whole idea that bids for attention, which is lovely, isn't it? I love that. And that when we stop noticing those, that's when we're really on the road to difficulties. And now I love that concept of the 4 horsemen. Perhaps you could talk about that.
Like the bids for attention. I remember when I read that, it really resonated with me. I hadn't quite really appreciated it, that when we say something like, oh, aren't the roses looking lovely? We're not really saying, often it's not, we are thinking that the roses look lovely and wanting to tell our partner that, but actually it's a bid to be in connection with them and to have some kind of communication with them. And like you say, the Gottman research shows that when those bids are consistently ignored and they're just met with silence, it's a predictor of divorce. It's a predictor that actually that connection isn't really being made. Yeah, the 4 horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Yeah, that's why there are 4, right? They are all so damaging. Criticism is, it's rife. I see it and hear it in my friends' conversations. It's so tempting to, get together with your girlfriends and to have a bit of a criticizing your partner. But actually, when you've chosen this person in your life, then it's really helpful to actually remember all of the qualities that you chose them for, and getting stuck into kind of criticizing them it can be so damaging. And when that rolls over into contempt, he talks a lot in that book about eye rolling, and again, that being a predictor. And I think we've all been there, been at a party with a couple when one of them starts kind of like when the other one is talking. It's horrible, isn't it?
Yes,
we feel it.
It is.
And it's, I think if you ever notice that you start doing it, that's the time, self-promotion time, get yourself to get some help to talk about it, because it's painful and it's going to erode the love between you. Yeah, defending. What really helps in relationship is, if there is a difficulty, to be able to air it, listen to it, and try and learn from it. And when we get into that kind of just batting it off and defending it, it's kind of, it's quite a child place to be, isn't it? To sort of like, no, I didn't do that, but actually, can you hear what the complaint is? A complaint is also a bid for connection, like we were talking about. It's also a bid to be in connection. So when relationships really get in trouble is when there aren't any bids for connection. So those complaints are actually a good sign. What could we look at? What could we change? And then stonewalling. That is the ultimate time when those opportunities to connect are simply met with a brick wall. If you're not familiar with that concept, it's just ignoring the other person and not giving them your connection, not saying when you're going to come back if you go out, not saying where you are. That in my book, when I'm working with a couple, things like that, they're just not okay. It's actually somewhat abusive, really, if somebody that you're in an intimate relationship with simply stonewalls you and stops talking to you. Like, we talk about neglect for babies being when babies' needs for connection aren't met, and stonewalling, it's very, very painful.
It can be soul destroying, can't it? Really
can. Yeah. I think that's interesting to say that soul. That's right, because it's our essence that's being met with a brick wall. And if that happens over and over again, the image I'm seeing in my mind's eye is a flower wilting. We need that energy between us to keep growing and keep staying in connection and full of vibrancy and having life and energy in the relationship. Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, it is a really good book, isn't it? I thought it was amazing, actually. And you don't have to be married to benefit from it. It's, it's good for any kind of relationship, actually, as intimate ones, but also just general relationships. I thought it was very, very powerful.
I think in America, marriage is so, it's such a sort of cornerstone of the way relationships are. There's a lot of, and so I think he's used that marriage word, but I completely agree. It really doesn't matter whether you're married or not.
And in your guide, you also offer tips for how to deal with conflict when the conflict happens. And I thought it was really interesting the way that you talked about how, there are some couples where they're not used to conflict and things get bedded down and ignored, but then they simmer. And obviously you've got even more of a potential for a boiling pot now with everybody being at home. And then you've got the people who are used to arguing. And of course, that volume or the temperature of that has probably gone up, exponentially. So how do both of those types of couples cope, especially when you probably, people may have other members of the family around as well. So it's all kind of adding to that big pressure pot, isn't it?
Right from the beginning of this, I had a lot of concern about the couples who were already in crisis with their relationship and prone to getting into difficulties with conflict and the domestic violence that we're all reading in the news. It's scary, and if anybody got any pennies left in their pots to give to charities, I think those charities are much in need at this time. But yes, there are definitely two types of couples. There are couples for whom conflict comes relatively easy, and it's for those couples, it's about learning when to step away and learning that actually nothing changes if you just keep staying and stuck in that pattern. So it's about learning to step away and being able to keep those conflict situations to a minimum and try and stop them, and then tackle some of the issues when things are less heated, when you've come back to feeling more resilient. A lot of that is personal work for the individuals. If I'm working with a couple in that situation, then I'll work with them both to look at how do they manage their own anger and how do they come back into equilibrium and calm down, because it's from a place where I talk a lot with clients about what happens in our brains and the neofrontal cortex and the limbic system. And if we're in our limbic system, in that kind of reptilian brain where we're very angry or frightened, or we don't have access to those more new parts of the neofrontal cortex to resolve the problems. So we're just going to escalate and get worse. So it's helping clients to come back to themselves and learn techniques to calm and soothe their own systems so that they can then have more calmer discussions. But the couples who never argue, then actually being able to bring some of the feelings is good. It's really useful to express frustration, express irritation, express anger, but in what I call clean anger. So to be able to name, and sometimes that's all that it is, just naming it, just saying, I'm really frustrated. Can I tell you about it? Could you listen to me? Rather than what a lot of people do is, like you say, is simmer it, just pretend that it's not there, or put on a smile, or try and make things nice again, because they can't bear the idea that there would be any conflict at all. And that's just as unhealthy in the long run.
And then what about intimacy? In general terms, under lockdown, it's like we started off, didn't we, with the mating in captivity and having a date night. But what can we do to try and not forget that even though we're together 24/7, this is our intimate romantic relationship? And how can we keep that going? And maybe we'll have you back on another podcast in the future, because there are all sorts of midlife issues surrounding that. But both from a lockdown and a midlife perspective, what advice do you have on that?
Yes, we talked about the dinner party idea. I think that's a nice one. But, we take on all these roles. Like you say, we're together 24/7. And so we're often becoming quite identified with the kind of workmate role, the friend role, the confidant role, the chef and restaurant diner role, all of these very practical things. And I think it's important to remember that, like you said, that this is our intimate partner, and that we, can we find spaces with each other to share intimacy, and what might that look like for us, and to have rich conversations about what would a really nourishing, sensual, intimate evening look like for each of us. What would we like to enjoy and explore? I think one of the problems that a lot of couples face is that they get into kind of tried and tested patterns of like, this is what intimacy is for us, this is what sex is for us, and that it gets all a bit into a rut. Expanding what might be possible, getting creative, having a look online at different resources. And I mentioned a set of cards called Pillow Talk from the School of Life that I think are really fun. I just think I've bought a new deck today about date cards. They're just having really brave, curious conversations about what you could do for the other one that they might really enjoy. And it might be a sensual massage. It might be reading something together, watching something together, but getting creative about what could be sensuous, enjoyable. I would definitely recommend that. Asking for what you need, and remembering to take time daily for hugging and really keeping the physical bond close. It's like we're close all the time in the space. And then those endings that used to be there, when I'm working with clients before lockdown, I would often encourage them to really pay attention to arriving back at home after being out and leaving, and really tuning in, being present for a hello and a goodbye. But if we're not having a hello and a goodbye, just there all the time, it's really easy to get out of the habit of just slowing down. David Schnarch is another great relationship writer who wrote the book Passionate Marriage. He talks about a technique called hug till relaxed, where you hug for long enough to let your nervous system get relaxed. And the data does show that people have more physical intimacy when they have more physical intimacy. I mean, it sounds obvious, but to actually be connected and have the body feel like it's having, that the bodies are having relationships as well as the kind of talking, and to let the bodies be in connection. I think that's a good idea too.
And I guess that sort of brings us back to where I started, where I was feeling guilty, for being annoyed, because I knew I was lucky to have somebody with me in lockdown. And there are so many people I know, I'm reading that people are really craving touch and craving being able to hug someone. So if we have somebody to hug, we probably ought to make the most of it, shouldn't we?
Yeah, but it's so natural to feel that, to notice the difficulties and to not always appreciate what we have got, or feel, like you say, feel guilty, that we should feel something different to what we're feeling. And a lot of my work with people is to just make in space to accept that sometimes we're going to feel guilty, sometimes we're going to feel irritated, sometimes we're going to feel like we want to punch them on the nose. And just to be self-compassionate about going through a whole range of feelings ourselves and not letting those feelings overrun us and take over, knowing that they will change. And then coming back to like what I'm hearing you doing, which is something I recommend at the beginning of the guide, is to come back to appreciation, that this person is a resource that we can lean in on and they can lean in on us, and that is really supportive at this time. It is a whole mixed bag of things. And we just, I hope that the guide just helps people to not make themselves too wrong if they get into difficulties. We can learn skills about, like, those skills around calming conflict or communicating more skillfully, and to forgive ourselves if we mess up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Why not sign up for a midlife breakthrough call with me to get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter? Don't get stuck in what can sometimes be the messy middle. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman at a time.